Welcome to the North Carolina Botanical Garden, and I welcome folks on Zoom who are joining us virtually today. We're grateful to have all of you here with us. I'm Joanna Massey-Lalikas. I'm the Director of Learning and Community Engagement here at the Garden, and co-moderating with me today in the back of the room is David Michaud. He's supporting us in the virtual realm with our online audience. We have folks tuning in from across North Carolina and a few folks from Maryland, Virginia, South Carolina, and Pennsylvania. So thanks for folks who are tuning in from a distance today. So I'll go ahead and I'll introduce John Gerwin. He is a researcher specializing in the life cycles and breeding biology of migratory birds, using radio telemetry to study their space use, nesting, and reproductive success. He collaborates on projects involving stable isotope chemistry, some population genetics of various warbler species as well. John chairs the Scientific Council on Rare, Threatened, and Endangered Birds of North Carolina, serves on the boards of the Wake Audubon Society and Audubon North Carolina's Important Bird Areas Technical Committee, and advises NC Partners in Flight. He co-leads ecotours locally, nationally, and internationally, including an annual bird banding trip to shade coffee plantations in Nicaragua, and he's done that since 2005. And he holds a bachelor's from University of Minnesota and a master's of science from Louisiana State University. So we're really thrilled to have John Gerwin here as part of this Bird Friendly Landscapes program series. That's a partnership between the North Carolina Botanical Garden and New Hope Bird Alliance. Please join me in welcoming John.
Thanks for coming out. We'll get started. I will mention that I had to stop going to Nicaragua a few years ago. Things imploded a bit, but it was good while it lasted. So, my topic today is an extinct bird. And so part of what I do in my job is I'm curator of ornithology at the museum. So we're the dead bird people. And but as mentioned, I do live bird study, but we have a collection of over 25,000 specimens. They're mostly study skins, but they can be bones, nests, eggs, wings, and people come to study them, or we ship them all around the country, once in a while to other countries, people who want to borrow them, measure them, do what they do. We have a large tissue collection that's for genetic resources. Probably our biggest request of loan material these days is for muscle tissue from birds for doing the genetic work people do. So that's a lot of what I do, sort of program managing. We have one Carolina Parakeet specimen in our collection, and but we don't really know its history. And that's a lot of the story of the Carolina Parakeet is there's is a lot we don't know about. That's why when I said that I break this up into 2 or 3 components because I can kind of tell you everything about the parakeet in 10 minutes. And then, but there's other things that are interesting too. So we'll go through some of that. Oh, come on, Dan. Let's see, try this one. Sometimes they just don't want to go. Hello. See if there's an arrow button. You know, it might have to be. Yeah, there. So I'm just going to go back in time and look at parrots as a broad thing in general. So the radiation that we think of parrots is a pretty big group, right? I think everybody's pretty familiar with parakeets and budgies and people's household parrots, and they come from all over. The best scientists figure out they really originated in what today is Australia, and then radiated out from there. And then as you know, Gondwana land splits up, and these animals are radiating out and evolving into different species. They're occupying these different niches, different habitats, and of course, radiating into different species. The bulk of when I've traveled and done my ecotour work, the bulk of it's been in the New World tropics, so Central and South America. There's quite a diversity there. The neotropical parrots, they're in this tribe. And I added a lot of text to my slides this time because I've been pretty sick for the last month, and so I don't forget things. There's a little extra text this time. But all the way from the Rio Grande and down through South America, you get a lot of different species. And then just look at the bigger picture. So the order name, we have the taxonomy, and we use these names of order and family and genus and species. The Psittaciformes is the order for the parakeet group. And if this is the family tree, a more recent one, if you follow the branches, you can see the four main groups. The Carolina parakeet would be in the Psittacidae, that's the one in black. That's a group of 179 species. Interesting to hopefully get a chance to show pictures of the New Zealand ones. I have some at the end. They're very bizarre parrots. There's only 4 species. But they're found everywhere. So there's also, we call it the New World and the Old World. So all over Africa, India, subcontinent, Southeast Asia. I know this is a little mind-numbing, but the real take-home is that, so there are 4 species now that have gone extinct, 4 parrot species in modern time. And this is a family tree, and this is a more recent one, 2023. So this is what I mean, where people are trying to get tissue samples and then extract DNA and do sequencing. And now it can be done with extinct things. So for example, we have provided skin samples or feather samples from pretty ancient specimens for which there are no muscle samples. Or they wanted a skin sample from the bird from 1904 to compare with somebody from 2000. So we've done that sort of thing, and this is the sort of thing done with Carolina parakeet. So you see the arrows pointing to Carolina parakeet. And the thing that is interesting, if my little, oh yeah, I gotta turn it on. So I'll show you a couple slides, but there's this group called Aratinga, and then there's Carolina parakeet, which is Conoropsis. This particular group of researchers took a species in Aratinga and created a genus just recently, but it's still within that group, this whole grouping. You can see there's a lot going on, but in all of this, and there's more, and there's more up here, but in all these species, they've decided that that's where the Carolina parakeet belongs, in the family tree. So here's another one, just to show you that up here is the Carolina parakeet, and you can see there's also Aratinga up here, that same genus. You don't see the other species because at the time people didn't have tissues of that other species, and they didn't include it in their study. So whenever you're missing something, you never really know. So this was 2012, and that other study I showed you was 2023. But at least they agree, because all of these are hypotheses. This is not saying this is what it is. This is saying this is what we hypothesize it is. And every 5 years, somebody comes along and can redo an analysis and refine. That's the way science works. We're refining things. But they're in agreement, and there are 2 pretty robust data sets that the Carolina parakeet is related to this group, these Aratinga. And what's interesting about that is, and there's a painting of one. So what that means is that the closest living relatives of the Carolina parakeet are in fact from South America. They're not Central American. And so a lot of times we think, well, maybe it's just geography, right? It's closer to home to be a Central American, but we don't really understand how these things have evolved over time and how things have dispersed over time. But with this genetic analysis, what we think we know is that the parakeet's relatives are South American. And so that just, again, that's at the bottom where my suggesting that it's colonized by an ancestor of the group, so some pretty either long distance dispersal or at a time when things, topographies were much closer together. The other group thought that the Carolina Parakeet was most closely related to the Nandi, or the earlier group, the 2012, and then the folks from 2023 say no, the species that you didn't have in your analysis, we think is the one that's most closely related, and that's the dusky-headed parakeet. These are actually common in captivity now. Carolina parakeet was kept in captivity too. So, talk a little bit more about the psittacids and the Carolina parakeet. So you probably know they're one of the most social groups of organisms out there. You probably read some of the studies that were done with the African gray parrot and the talking, the vocabulary that bird developed, other work that's been done. And they're inquisitive. You know, they're thought to be tame. That's sort of a squishy word, but they're willing to investigate things. You know, some would consider them the most intelligent, or perhaps equal with crows and raven. Probably the raven would be right up there with the other most intelligent bird. But you can give a parrot, you can give them a call, you can give these things activities to do. They can solve problems and things. It's pretty interesting. So the behavior part of being inquisitive or being tame or unafraid is what led to a lot of death for the Carolina parakeet. Unfortunately, they were attracted to farmland, and if a farmer shot just one bird out of a flock, the other flock would turn around and try to come to its aid, which meant that the farmer could then shoot the rest of them. I will, if we get into the second one, and every picture I show you, it will talk about parrots under siege for illegal trading. It's probably, I don't know, probably next to cocaine. It might be one of the biggest things that goes on in wildlife trafficking is with parrots. So there's a lot of trapping, a lot of poaching. There, of course, is habitat destruction going on wherever parrots occur. Sometimes that gregariousness doesn't help. In Australia, the one, forget its name, I forget how to pronounce it, but it's the pink one. But it will, which one? Yeah, the galah. It will get onto the cars and it will pick at the rubber around the windshields. People don't like that. I can understand. So what do we know? Well, interestingly enough, given that there's so much great natural history exploration that went on in this country, starting with with John Lawson early in the 1700s, and then, but really later in the 1700s through the 1800s, some of the best stuff. The Bartrams went through the Southeast. There was Wayne and others, and they have, and Audubon just recorded so much stuff. But we know that we only have, I think, maybe 40% of Audubon's journals. I think 60% are lost. And so there are probably others we don't have. So of all the things they recorded, and it's copious, it's a library's worth of natural history information, very little was recorded about the Carolina parakeet. So described by Linnaeus in 1758, if you don't know, he was sitting over in Europe and people were shipping specimens over from all around the world. And he developed his system of binomial nomenclature. And so that's where we get the genus, species, subspecies, and he would look at things and study them and name them. So it was named actually after the state of South Carolina. Hope that doesn't bother anybody. One of only two parrots native to the southeast U.S. There's always a debate about the second one, but there's pretty good evidence that years ago there was a macaw, a thick-billed macaw that hung out in Arizona, maybe even into New Mexico, Texas, and I'll try to come back to that later. So I would, the evidence was very good to me that so we had two species at one point native to the U.S. These are some names that were given to it by different Native American groups, and I'm sure that they have a lot of stories too. And we were talking earlier how there's probably a lot of oral history related to Carolina parakeet, so it may not be written down. There are a lot of people when those guys were doing early exploration in the 1800s, they would often work with Native Americans, and I don't know if if that was ever discussed, something like the parakeets, so maybe there's still more in somebody's memory. These are some sizes. So it looks like a young bird on the right. So, it's not a real large bird. 125 grams is like common grackle. You see that, or mourning dove. There are two subspecies listed, where the one considered to the west is a little more blue in the wings. There's a drawing from Catesby, 1731. So the bird of the Midwest and the Southeast. The habitat, what was written down as typical habitat, was cypress swamp and sycamore trees. And so those sycamore trees are along rivers. It's a bottomland plant, and yet the bird roamed widely. So again, I said it found farmsteads to liking, and that was a bit of a problem. Apparently, it would work on crops, corn in particular. So it would eat a variety of things, different fruits, different seeds, but apparently it was also very good at foraging on cockleburs, which are toxic to other animals. So then, and that's an interesting point too, so about the believed to feed on cypress and sweet gum, and people have looked at the distribution of plants and animals. So for example, when you look at some things like wax myrtle, and you look at the winter distribution of tree swallows, for example, they line up really well. And a tree swallow is one of only two birds that can forage on a wax myrtle fruit. The wax myrtle has a complex chemical in it, so a waxy ester, as it's called, and most animals, including you and I, can't really digest it. But a tree swallow and a yellow-rumped warbler can digest it. So when you look at the distribution of the winter range of a tree swallow, all the other swallows migrate to Central and South America, but a tree swallow can survive in the southeastern, but it almost perfectly lines up with where wax myrtle bushes are. So there's this thought that there's some commensalism with sweet gum and cypress and the Carolina parakeet when you look at the distribution, and also you look at the retraction of some of the plants. It's, where, of course not, you have just problems with climate change, saltwater intrusion and stuff, but before that, people were looking at this, the loss of the Carolina parakeet almost surely affected how the cypress and sweet gum were being distributed around by the parakeet itself. So, because they were an aid in the dispersal of those seeds. So here's the range as we knew it from all the reports. The gray-green there is considered like unknown status through West Virginia and Western North Carolina and Eastern Kentucky and that sort of thing. But otherwise, it ranged from the true Midwest, you've all the way out to Iowa, Missouri, you're into Nebraska and Oklahoma and down to Texas, and then on east into Pennsylvania, Florida. Um, from things I've read, its stronghold would have been in the southeast, but there were two subspecies. As it says, a yellow line kind of demarcates where the subspecies line would have been. The last wild bird was that people are confident in was from 1904, Florida bird, I believe. And then there was another Florida bird reported from 1913, but as far as I know, no one's been able to prove that one. There is a colleague in Raleigh who works in the governor's office, and he's been working with some other folks to, I don't know if he does this on his own time. We both went to LSU, and there's a long history of bird nuts coming out of LSU, just doing a lot on your own, even if it's not your job. But he's been working with some other folks to try to track down some of these reports and try to track down more archival notebooks or information. And you never know, a newspaper article shows up and there it is, there's the information. And so people are still trying to trace back some of these things, but for now, it's considered 1904. The last captive bird died. The Cincinnati Zoo, my alma mater, so to speak, it was in 1918. Actually, was in a youth group at the Cincinnati Zoo. I really got into birds and nature stuff through that youth group. But yeah, that was February 21st, 1918. It was also the location for the last passenger pigeon, was at the Cincinnati Zoo. So in 1939, this bird was declared extinct. So things that are missing. It's pretty amazing, to think that all through the 1800s, when these guys were documenting every possible thing that they could document, that nobody documented in writing the nest of a Carolina parakeet that we're confident in. So it's reported to nest in cavities. Many other parakeets and even the bigger macaws and parrots, many of them nest in a cavity. So that makes sense. Reported to be in maybe a hollow tree. It can nest in riverbanks where kingfishers make cavities in the mud bank. And there's a few reports of colonies nesting in flimsy stick nests on a cypress branch, and that's possible. I mean, it is possible, but they're secondhand reports. So again, there might be an old article in a newspaper sometime that shows up, something from the 1800s, or somebody's notebook. Every now and then we get a call from somebody, and my grandfather's got an old notebook of all his bird sightings. And I'm like, we'll take it, because you never know. And I leaf through it. It's so cool. It's like 1918, living out in Salisbury, which was probably just a farm, back then, and tiny little, it wasn't really a city, and there's all these birds that you don't see out there anymore. And so you never know. Something might show up. So apparently the eggs were laid in July. It says no actual date on when or how many. For about the last 14 years, I've been mentoring a bunch of teenagers. I went through that youth group at the zoo, and I thought I would do some of the same through the museum. And I took a couple young women on who, all through their high school years, they spent thousands of hours. We had a huge array of eggs. A lot of people collected eggs for a hobby in the 1800s and early 1900s. And then when the Migratory Bird Treaty Act came along in 1917, 18, it stopped. And then the eggs were put away, and then the children and the grandchildren find them later, and they contact us. And we had been given a bunch, but it's usually lower priority. Sometimes they have data, but often the notebook was chewed up by silverfish and roaches and on. they don't have data. And so anyway, these thousands of eggs have been sitting neglected, and these two young women went through them. It took them 4 years and reboxed them, and without much information, they had to use books and online and what we knew of our known eggs in our collection and identify them all. And they were measuring things, and at one point, these eggs, which do have some numbers on them, the number related, there are two systems of numbering, it turns out. And there were two twin sisters, and the one said, well, if the number matches belted kingfisher, and so does the general color shape. But then about a week or two later, the other one said, no, because she had the other catalog, and she was remeasuring it. She said they're too big, they're the wrong dimension. It's just 2 millimeters, but it makes a difference. And the number in the other catalog was Carolina Parakeet. And so when we started looking around, we realized that they do much more match Carolina Parakeet. So it says May 20th, but there was no location, so we don't know if these are in captivity or not. I need to get these into, there's a registry for all this stuff, so I need to get that submitted. Yeah, so there they are. So, could have been wild, could have been captive, we don't know. There are some specimens of young that from the fall and the winter, so when you know that, then you can backtrack to say, well, then they were probably on a timeline like other birds around here in the spring and summer. The other thing we never really figured out, like with the ivory-billed woodpecker and the parakeet, with the ivory-bill, we never knew if it ever occurred in North Carolina. We don't know. We know they were in South Carolina. We don't know if the only woodpecker that ever made it to North Carolina was brought by Alexander Wilson to a hotel in Wilmington and alive. But we don't know where he got it. We think he got it in South Carolina and was painting it and brought it up. But it's like the parakeet, because it roamed so much, so we don't really know what it was doing in the Carolinas. It definitely had a stronghold in Georgia, Florida, and surely through Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. But as far as as it was roaming around and doing what it does, we don't know yet exactly what it was doing. It may have been a transient through the Carolinas. And then we don't know why exactly it went extinct. We suspect it's for multiple reasons, because it usually is. It's usually a 1-2 or a 1-2-3 punch. A lot of things, in a system can handle a perturbation or two, but when you hit something from multiple angles, or you perturb the system in too many ways, then it collapses, and that's probably what happened with the parakeets. So by the Civil War, they're gone from the Carolinas. So by 1870, for example, they're restricted to Georgia and Florida, maybe Alabama and Mississippi. There was a lot of habitat change. I mean, we refer to it as habitat destruction. There's, for a parakeet and for a lot of forest birds, it was. Some of the most intensive logging went on through the 1800s. It's just super intense. When there are records about that, and when you go back and read about what went on, it's pretty striking how much we have recovered. I know it doesn't always seem that way, but it was really something to read some of the historic stuff. And then there's this idea that there was competition with honeybees, because the honeybee is not native, and the honeybee also is a cavity nester. And so there's this thought that, and there was some evidence that, because at this time, when the honeybee wasn't yet established, but it was establishing, it was expanding in big numbers. So, kind of a race. And so, again, that's sort of maybe a piece of the puzzle, that there's some competition. There have been documented some poultry diseases, and these diseases can affect other birds. Right now we have the bird flu going around. We've had West Nile virus, and they often hit the poultry, but people have looked and found some historic, it's just minimal data right now, but some instances where it looked like the disease in some areas with chickens may have crossed over to parakeet. And I'm sure as we get, more technology, better tech, involved in doing these kinds of assays, they'll be able to figure that out. Probably still some, like a fingerprint, you can swim through a river and shed some skin, and my colleague at the museum, genomics, can come along and sample the water and get the DNA out. You don't have to be there anymore. You can run, but you can't hide. Like, you're leaving signals everywhere you go, so it may be that they'll put that together too. So, and then shooting was pretty rampant. As I said, it was an agricultural pest. It came in flocks, and I mentioned that the aspect of they're a flocking bird that's very loyal. They were essentially extended families. And so if one bird was shot and fell, all the other birds would circle back and come see what was going on. So then they would be shot. From what I read, not all the farmers minded them if they would just stick to the cockleburs. The farmers didn't mind them eating all the cocklebur they wanted, but who could resist some orchard fruits or some other corn, nice corn, that sort of thing. So there's no doubt that people shot for sport a lot. The passenger pigeon was shot by the millions. Now, they were eaten, but it was still very considered sporting. I don't know how much the millinery trade would have affected the parakeet. It surely some. That activity was big really after the Civil War, and then up until about 1910 or so. So it was a late 1800s, early 1900s. It was a big deal to have adornment, the women's hats, a lot of different kinds of feathers. The hairstyle changed, and with that came a different kind of hat. And with that, they couldn't support feathers anymore. Along with that came some legislation, so the combination of that. But, as I said, by 1870, there were no parakeets in the Carolinas. So I'm sure some were, it was a bit of a problem. There were a lot of other birds being shot for the millinery trade. The egrets were the main one, and herons were from the southeastern U.S. That's how Audubon societies got started, was to protect the egrets. And then across in other places in South America, there were a lot of hummingbirds and parrots down there were being shot. And then, over Southeast Asia, New Guinea, a lot of birds of paradise were shot for the millinery trade. So a lot of different birds were being shot. But I mean, it all adds up. You've got all these different factors, these stressors on the system. So that's the end of my Carolina Parakeet story, which, again, to tell you a little bit of what we know and a lot about what we don't know. And I can tell you other things about other parakeets, but before I wanted to see if there are any other questions about parakeets first.
Okay. David, any online too?
Were the Native Americans in North Carolina any source of information about the birds?
A question about if there was a source of information about the parakeets from Native Americans in North Carolina, and I don't know. We were just talking about that, how we might try to talk to somebody from, say, the Lumbee tribe, because that would have been, that area is where the parakeet would have likely hung out the most, down in the Waccamaw region, and the Lumbee region, the Cape Fear region. So I and my colleagues that are trying to track down some stuff, I'd have to ask them if they're contacting anybody, because I'm sure there's oral history, although, it'd be fading. But
Weren't they raising corn? Weren't they raising corn? The Lumbees?
yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, there were a lot of crops being done. So, and I'm sure there's, they had a name for it. So, as I showed in that one slide, there, three different tribes had their specific name for it because they had their own language, and they had their name for the Carolina parakeet. They knew the Carolina parakeet. I mean, they knew it. So things like details, I bet you they do have details, like where they nested. Nobody asked. So it would be a good thing for somebody to do, that would be a good little project to do. Go around and try to talk to people and find out what's known.
We have a question online, and then I'll get you.
From an online attendee, have any efforts been made to clone Carolina parakeets or otherwise revive them?
I think, I'm trying to remember now. So I've hosted one or two researchers to do cloning, and I know one was for the passenger pigeon, because they know its nearest relative, or they think it's the bandtail pigeon, which is out in the western U.S., and they're trying to use bandtail pigeon genome to recreate a passenger pigeon. I can't remember if the other person was doing Carolina parakeet or not, but there is a group of people, they refer to it as the de-extinction process, and I'm sure somebody's working on it. The Aratinga parakeets that are related, they're really common in South America. They have plenty of genetic material to work with.
So I actually have a related question. I read that the scarlet macaw was the most DNA, close DNA, had close DNA to the Carolina parakeet. Is that possible?
No, they're not too far off, but they are. But the closest was that the group of kind of like these guys, the Aratinga group of parakeets. I believe that when you go up the family tree to the next branch, you get to the macaw, and the macaws are kind of split. It turns out genetically they're not all related. I mean, that's how common names are, right? They look alike, but they're not all necessarily genetically related. So there's a branch of macaws up here and a branch of macaws here. It's the same with Aratinga. There's a group of Aratinga here and a group of Aratinga down here, and they're going to have to make some name changes to make it all make sense. But I believe that the group of macaws with the scarlet macaw is close, but it's not the closest. But it depends on what you call closest, right? But what the other two researchers are saying is the closest are those Aratinga parakeets, and there's 3 or 4 species.
And one more from online, also related to this. Let's say the Carolina parakeet could be resurrected. Do you think it would thrive today?
Well, that's the big question, because now you have a whole different set of challenges and unknowns. We certainly have sweet gum, we have cypress. I think you have a hugely sympathetic public. So that would be interesting. It's always a huge philosophical thing, like how much messing with this stuff do you do? Or when do you just let it go? And it's not, it's not unnatural for things to go extinct. It's just that probably the way some of these went was more anthropogenic than natural. But although, I mean, we're just part of nature too. So it's a tough one. I suspect that, well, I can get into it a little bit here, and that might help answer the question with if there's time. Do we have a little time?
Sure.
Because that might help answer what I'll show you next.
Great. And we can
Actually,
take some more
that's a
questions.
good lead-in. So my pun on words about cytasiformes and cytasity here is that what would a parakeet do today? Well, it might do what these guys are doing. So there are now introduced parrots and parakeets all over the world, but I'll show you some, for example, just in South Florida. Just some examples of what's going on. So here's the Nande, which is the one that the researchers in 2012 thought was most closely related to the Carolina parakeet. Folks get tired of their pets, and if they can't find a home for it, let them go. And if you're in New York, maybe you live, maybe you don't. But if you're in South Florida, probably not too hard if you're a parakeet. So the black-footed parakeet's doing fine in South Florida. Budgies, the chestnut-fronted macaw, canary-winged parakeet, monk parakeet. A long time ago, people thought monk parakeets might be the closest relative to the Carolina parakeet, but they're nowhere near. We now know. There's your budgies. There's a chestnut-fronted macaw. I mean, imagine you walk out the front door and that macaw is sitting on your car or your porch. And it didn't used to be there. That's a South American bird. There's a canary-winged parakeet. There's some monks. The monk parakeets is from Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay. It's building big stick nests, and they're quite destructive because they like the big electrical transformers. And when I worked down there, people hated this because they were always knocking out the power. There's your another family tree, and there's your monk parakeet, which is, I think somewhere up there was, I don't know why I was showing. I know up there at the top, anyway, is the Carolina parakeet and the Aratingas. I was hoping to see if the little macaws would show up, but I think the macaws up above. But anyway, this monk guy is down in here. So he turns out to be not so closely related. I'm looking to see, but no, I think what happens on the family tree, there's another branch that comes out, maybe out, I don't know exactly where, to where the macaws come out. So it's there, but it's not right there. Oh wait, there it is. It is there. Right there. So you see this branch goes up and over, Carolina parakeet and the Aratinga, and then the branch comes down, and then that's the macaw. So it's not the nearest because it has other relatives near it, but it is pretty close. Yeah, there he is, a little. So some other ones down there. Military macaw, cockatiel, lots of different parrots. These are all kept in captivity, and then people get tired of them and just let them go. And they have all established populations in South Florida, which tells me that if somebody did recreate a Carolina parakeet, it would probably survive somewhere. There's a lot of pressure to be a parrot. I wouldn't want to be a parrot out there these days. Here's the thick-billed parrot that I was telling you about earlier. Again, we're pretty confident that this bird even did some breeding in Arizona up into the 1920s. So that's the other native parrot to the U.S. Old-growth pine. Those forests are heavily logged now. So this is considered an endangered species. There's where it occurs in Mexico now. Made down to 1,000 individuals maybe. And it's slightly migratory, so it nests up high, but then after it's done nesting, they will migrate to a different elevation, and these things are not always well known. To know that now, we can do things like stuff I've done with tracking birds. I go out and catch live birds and put these different tracking devices on them. And the newer ones now, we have a bird like this that's this big, I can put a satellite transmitter on and sit back with a cup of coffee and wait for the data to roll in. And then that's what people are doing with some of these as these birds go up and down the mountain. It's only now that we're learning some of this stuff. So when they did they tried reintroducing the thick-billed parakeet into Arizona. So a lot of money went into this. But they found that there's a hawk out there, the northern goshawk, and it was a voracious predator. And the parrots that were raised in captivity were simply not good enough to recognize a predator. I mean, that's the problem with raising them in captivity. They might, no interaction with humans, everything's shielded and all that. But the bird, when you don't have a parent to learn from, or in the case of a parrot, you don't have a whole family to learn from, it's a pretty tricky proposition. Red-tailed hawks even ate a few. Ring-tailed cats got a few. So the only success they've had is if they caught some wild birds in Mexico and brought them up, because they were evolved to avoid predation. A similar species is the maroon-fronted parrot, also down in Mexico, on the northeast side. Pine fruit that they like to feed on. It's a restricted range species. They nest in colonies, but they like limestone cliffs. They like those cliffs to be near water, so they have very picky requirements, and less than 3,000 birds. So on the left is the thick-billed parrot, and on the right is a very restricted range for the maroon-fronted. This little parakeet is down in Colombia. So pretty high up. You're getting up above 7,000 feet. So here's a case where, the cultural history meets the natural history. A problem for this bird is that when there's deforestation, it was often done in the name of drug cultivation. So, I mean, in some cases, you can plant a lot of coca trees and you might have some habitat, but not for the Santa Marta parakeet. The Tucumán parrots, they are native to northwest Argentina. I did some work there and got to see a few of these in the wild. And then they're ranged into southeast Bolivia. In the past, they were pretty heavily trapped like all these others and sold on the undercover bird market. We actually have one or two in our collection. They were confiscated at RDU. Somebody was trying to smuggle them through. When they're caught like that, there used to be a fellow in Eflin, and he was the fish and wildlife caretaker. And he would take care of them. They wouldn't just euthanize them, he would take care of them. He had a huge aviary, and so he would nurse them along for however many years they live. And some of these things can live 80 years, but inevitably some would die. And sometimes they're diseased, and sometimes the way they're smuggled is pretty horrible. The treatment, stuffed into somebody's sock, or they put drugs in them to keep them quiet and all that. So anyway, one of the Tucumán parrots didn't make it very long after. So So then we became the repository. Right, so that's just my second batch. I was just saying that to answer the question, there are a lot of parrots and parakeets that are doing quite well that didn't used to be here. There are even some in New York, Chicago, because that's among parakeet. Because if you go south into Argentina, the south latitude matches the north latitude of a New York or Chicago. So there are little pockets of monk parakeets in London, New York, Chicago, because they're in the right latitude. They're just north-south. So there's a lot of parakeets doing just fine that didn't used to be there. No. And then, you want to hear any more, or are we done?
We have about 8 minutes.
8
so
minutes?
Is that
Well,
enough time to go through the third
I
one?
can
We
zip
have a few questions, though, in the room.
I'll zip you through just a couple of cute things. So the Puerto Rican parrot, nearly driven to extinction, but they've been doing some restoration to try to get them back, including artificial nest cavities. So folks at NC State have been working on Puerto Rican parrots for a while because one of the professors is Puerto Rican and he's been continuing to work there for 30 years. All the islands in the Caribbean, they have their own brand of parrot or parakeet. So here's a Hispaniolan parrot. So that's Haiti and Dominican. It's been introduced to some other islands to try to boost the numbers. Again, you'll keep seeing the word trapping because the rarer these things are, the more desirable they are to people in the cage bird industry. Brings more money. Still doing pretty well, but it doesn't take long to go from 10,000 to 1,000. There's the Bahama parrot, which is only found on the island, the subspecies is only found on the island of Abaco in the Bahamas. And here's one that nests on the ground. That's a problem because of rats, cats, mongoose, those things get into the habitat. Trapping again. And then all these different, these are the Amazon parrots. Those are some of the more common ones in captivity. In this case, you've got yellow-billed and black-billed, which are island ones. Little Cuban parakeet. They're a cavity nester, old woodpecker thing, still, again, subjected to trapping. You don't want to be a parakeet out there these days. Hispaniola, and this is different from the parrot. This is a parakeet. Still doing fairly well. This guy's on Dominica. Yeah, then you have hurricanes, which can be a problem. Growing bananas, deforestation. This one's obviously struggling a bit with less than 1,000 individuals. The imperial parrot, one of the coolest looking parrots, also on Dominica. And there's a lot of people who want to trap and sell these. Yeah, this one's takes a hit. St. Lucia, another one, beautiful. We're always prepared. Look at that. And there's, I got another one. 500 birds. St. Vincent parrot, also beautiful. Another island-specific bird, another one that wants to be trapped. It doesn't want to be trapped. People want to trap it. What the island people have been doing there is they've been creating their own educational campaigns. And they have worked with people from the US and some European countries. We often provide initial funding to do outreach, like school programs, festivals, and to say, rather than making money off trapping and selling, how about festivals and attracting tourists and bird watching and celebrate your bird. And it's been actually pretty successful on several islands of getting people attitude to turn around. but in the end, the idea is to let them run the show, you know, give them some support, maybe a little training, show them how people have done things, but then turn it over to them. And it's gone pretty well. All right, this is a couple of last ones because these are kind of cool. Like this one looks like the bill is wrong, but it's not. That's the way they are. The slender bill conure. They're down in Patagonia region, and they use that slender bill to pry conifer nuts from cones, especially a tree called the monkey puzzle tree. So very specific foraging. This parrot is in New Guinea. It's also known as the vulturine parrot, and it feeds almost exclusively on just some figs. I like figs. I don't know if I want to feed exclusively on a fig, but this one does. The yellow-eared parrot was thought to be extinct, and then it was rediscovered, which is exciting. So right now, it's at 2 locations in Northwest Colombia, rediscovered in 1991. Latest, I mean, I looked into it 10 years ago, up to 1,100 birds, so that's pretty cool. There's a yellow-eared parrot up close, and it's associated with wax palms. So again, a lot of these birds, one of the reasons they can be uncommon is that they have very specific, they're picky eaters. So there's a case where trying to get people to not use too much palm frond for Palm Sunday, but maybe try some other plants to leave some of the palms for the birds. And this is some of the weirdest birds. These are, you know, I mentioned at the beginning, this is the kakapo or the owl parrot. It is native to New Zealand. It's a flightless nocturnal parrot, which makes no sense. It's like an oxymoron if there ever was. But this is a bird that walks around, climbs, it can glide, kind of like a flying squirrel. The heaviest, longest lived parrot that we know of. Crazy, 120 years. It will breed every 2 to 5 years. No male parental care, but they form leks. No pair bond, which is different from a lot of the other parrots. Huh. I forgot about that. So the female that eats more protein-rich food produces more male offspring. And then there's a drawing of one. So a lot of conservation efforts. Because when you have these things that get onto an island or it gets into an area, a predator on the ground that didn't used to be there, you have a real problem. That happened with seabirds all over the Pacific and South Atlantic. Happened on the Aleutians some. So I think there's 126 individuals when I put this together years ago. And again, here's a case where the indigenous people of New Zealand knew all about this bird. It was a historically important, culturally important bird to them. You can see a lot of stuff on the archive website. Actually, I guess that's it. Yeah, you can see a lot of stuff on the archive. So anyway, those last 2 New Zealand ones are just ones I wanted to mention. And so that's that. If any more questions in their time, we can do it.
I want to take one question here. Did you still have a question up front?
In the drawings from like the 18th and 19th centuries, do they distinguish between the genders of a species in their drawings? And if so, like, does the Carolina parakeet, is there a difference in coloring between males and females? Do we know?
Right. So question about gender differences, like in the parrots and the morphology. There are differences, and it depends on the species. In some cases, it's dramatic. So a lot of times, the folks knew what they were doing. So if they drew something with the dusky head, they knew it was a young one. There was I'm pretty sure, and I've forgotten now, there was difference between male and female Carolina parakeet in say the saturation of the color. It was more the size. It's not always the case that males are bigger, but in the case of the parakeet anyway, the males are about 10 or 15% bigger than the female. And so there was a size thing. Have you seen like an eclectus parrot before? You would think they're two species. The male and female are so different looking. So that's a old world, what we call an old world parrot, but some of them are really different. And some of them are very, very similar, and it's really hard to tell apart if they're together and they're allopreening. You can then tell by behavior, or maybe the size difference will show up. Yeah.
Thank you, John. This has been great. Are you able to stay a few minutes after
Yep.
for some other
Yep.
questions? Great. Well,
you.
please join me in thanking John for being
All
here
right.
today.
Thanks for coming out.
Thank you all for joining us on this Lunchbox Talk. We look forward to seeing you next year. This is the last Lunchbox Talk of the year, and we have Mary Sonas, who will be joining us in January. So don't miss that. We'll see you soon.